A human body should not be found in a concrete chamber beneath a public toilet. Such a place is an engineered void, a space designed for utility and nothing more. A septic vault meant to hold waste, not secrets. Yet, in the cool autumn of a year marked by loss, this is precisely where the search for a missing man would come to its horrifying conclusion. It was a discovery that defied all logic, a grim tableau that transformed a simple missing person case into a chilling tale of inexplicable violence, turning a place of natural beauty into a tomb. The man at the center of this burgeoning mystery was Charles Muldow, a 53-year-old software engineer from San Jose, California. He was not an expert survivalist or a hardened adventurer. He was an ordinary man with a passion for the quiet solitude of the outdoors. To his family and friends, he was a kind, thoughtful individual, a man who found peace on the open road and rejuvenation in the untamed landscapes of the American West. His trip to Oregon was meant to be another one of these peaceful excursions, a chance to camp, hike, and photograph the state's rugged beauty before the winter rains set in. He planned to explore the southern part of the state, an area renowned for its dense forests, volcanic landscapes, and pristine lakes. The journey was a simple one, a loop that would take him through several national forests and parks. Charles was a meticulous planner, a habit born from his profession. He had an itinerary, and he had shared it. He was expected to stay in regular contact, checking in every few days to let his family know he was safe. His disappearance was not a gradual fading away. It was an abrupt and total silence. His last known communication was a phone call to his son. He sounded happy and relaxed, describing the stunning scenery he had witnessed and mentioning his next planned stop, a campground near Hyatt Reservoir in the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument. He told his son he would call again in a couple of days. The call never came. Charles Muldow, a solitary traveler in a vast wilderness, had simply vanished. At first, the silence was not a cause for panic. A dead phone battery or a lack of cell service in the remote mountains were logical and comforting explanations. But as 2 days turned into 3, and then 4, a deep sense of unease settled over his family. Charles was reliable. He was responsible. This prolonged silence was entirely out of character. The initial reassurances they offered each other began to fray, replaced by the sharp edge of fear. The moment they officially reported him missing to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the clock began to tick on a search that would consume enormous resources and yield nothing but frustration. The initial search operation was a textbook example of wilderness rescue protocol. Deputies were dispatched to the Hyatt Reservoir area, the last place Charles had mentioned. They located his campsite, but it was eerily empty. His tent was there, but it appeared undisturbed. More importantly, his silver Saab sedan was missing. This single fact offered a sliver of hope. Perhaps he had simply driven somewhere else, deviating from his plan. Investigators began the methodical but often difficult task of trying to trace his digital and financial footprints. They checked for any activity on his credit cards and bank accounts. There was none. They pinged his cell phone, but it was either turned off or out of battery. Its last signal registered days earlier near his last known location. The search area was immense, a sprawling territory of dense evergreen forests, rugged hills, and a confusing network of logging roads and hiking trails that crisscrossed the mountains. The landscape that had drawn Charles in with its promise of serene beauty now revealed its indifferent and concealing nature. Search and rescue teams were mobilized, a small army of professionals and dedicated volunteers. They established a command post and began to carve the vast wilderness into manageable grids. Ground crews on foot and ATVs scoured the trails and back roads, their eyes peeled for any sign of the missing man or his vehicle. In the air, Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras swept over the dense canopy, searching for any heat signature that could be a person or a recently running engine. K9 units worked the ground, their powerful noses testing the air for any trace of human scent. Days of exhaustive searching bled into a week, and the initial hope began to curdle into dread. The searchers found nothing. There were no broken branches, no discarded pieces of equipment, no footprints leading off a trail into the dense undergrowth. There was no sign of an accident, no evidence of a man who had gotten lost or injured. The absence of clues was itself a clue, a deeply unsettling one. It suggested that Charles Moldau hadn't simply wandered off. Something had happened to him. Early theories were considered and methodically dismissed. The idea that he had voluntarily disappeared, choosing to abandon his life, was inconsistent with his character and the lack of any financial or electronic activity. An animal attack was a possibility in such a wild area, but experienced trackers found no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no drag marks. The most logical remaining theory was a vehicle accident. It was plausible that his car had gone off one of the winding remote roads and was hidden from view in a steep ravine or obscured by the thick forest. This theory became the primary focus of the intensified search. Crews rappelled down steep embankments, pushing through thick brush to check every ravine and gully along the roads he might have traveled. The aerial search patterns were reflown, this time at lower altitudes, the observers straining to see through the trees. Still, they found nothing. The silver Saab and the man who drove it remained missing. The forest held its silence. The scale of the operation was immense, yet it felt like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast, empty beach. As weeks passed, the grim reality set in. The active, large-scale search could not be sustained indefinitely. With heavy hearts, officials announced they were scaling back the operation. While the case would remain open, the daily grid searches and helicopter flights would cease. Hope, once a driving force, was now a flickering ember. The family was left in a state of agonizing limbo, caught between the desperate desire for his safe return and the growing need for some kind of answer, any answer at all. The mystery of what happened to Charles Moldau settled into the quiet background, becoming a cold case filed away in a sheriff's office cabinet. Nearly 3 months passed. The vibrant greens of summer had long since faded into the muted browns and grays of late autumn. The search for Charles Moldau was no longer in the headlines. For most, he was a forgotten name, another unfortunate soul swallowed by the wilderness. But on a cold, overcast day, 2 Bureau of Land Management employees performing routine maintenance would stumble upon the case's horrifying secret. They were tasked with servicing the public restrooms at the Lone Pine Trailhead, a remote facility not far from where the search for Charles had been centered. One of the structures was a CXT-style vault toilet, a common type in parks and recreational areas. These are simple, durable, concrete buildings set over a large underground septic tank. As one of the workers went about his duties, he noticed something was wrong. The heavy concrete lid that sealed the top of the vault, a massive slab that should have been bolted securely in place, was slightly ajar. It was a strange and unsettling sight. These lids were designed to be immovable without specialized equipment. A foul odor emanated from the gap, a smell far worse than the usual unpleasantness associated with such a facility. A sense of professional duty mixed with a growing unease compelled them to investigate. Using a pry bar, they managed to lift the heavy lid further. Peering into the dark, subterranean chamber below, their flashlights cut through the gloom and revealed an unimaginable horror. It was him. The body of a man was concealed inside the concrete vault. The discovery sent a shockwave through the local community and law enforcement. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office descended on the scene, cordoning off the entire trailhead. This was no longer a missing person case. It was a homicide investigation. Forensic experts were called in to carefully process the grim and disturbing crime scene. The location itself was baffling. How could a body end up inside a sealed concrete vault? Who would do such a thing? The process of recovering the remains was slow and methodical. The team had to work in a confined and hazardous space, meticulously documenting every detail. Once removed, the body was transported to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. Dental records soon confirmed the victim's identity. It was Charles Moldau. The family, who had been clinging to the faintest sliver of hope, now had their answer. It was the worst possible outcome, delivered in the most bizarre and nightmarish manner imaginable. The autopsy delivered the investigation's first critical breakthrough. Charles Moldau had not died of natural causes or an accident. The forensic pathologist determined the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. He had been murdered. The condition of his body suggested he had been killed shortly after his disappearance and placed in the vault soon after. The killer had not just murdered him. They had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide his body in a place where it might never have been found. With the confirmation of a homicide, the investigation pivoted with renewed intensity. Detectives now had a specific time and place to focus on. They knew Charles was killed around the time he vanished, and his body was found at the Lone Pine Trailhead. This narrowed the scope of their inquiry dramatically. They began to re-interview everyone who had been in the area at the time, from campers and hikers to local residents. They pooled campground registration logs, park ranger reports, and any other records that might place someone at or near the scene of the crime. They also re-examined the initial report about his missing Saab. If his body was at the trailhead, what had happened to his car? The case files were scoured, and a small, previously overlooked detail caught their attention. About 2 weeks after Charles was reported missing, a United States Forest Service officer had found a silver Saab sedan abandoned on a remote, dead-end logging road several miles from the Lone Pine Trailhead. At the time, without a body, it was treated as a found vehicle, but now it was a critical piece of the puzzle. The killer had murdered Charles and then driven his car to a remote location to dump it, hoping it would either never be found or would lead searchers on a wild goose chase. The investigation was now focused on finding a person with a connection to the area, someone familiar with its remote roads and locations. They needed to find a ghost, an individual who could operate in this wilderness without drawing attention. Detectives began to dig into local records, looking for anyone with a history of violence or strange behavior who lived in the sparsely populated region. They spoke to longtime residents, asking about hermits, recluses, or anyone known to have conflicts with visitors. A name began to surface, a name associated with paranoia and a simmering resentment of outsiders. The name was Michael David Bullard. At 62 years old, Bullard was a local loner who lived in a ramshackle property not far from the National Monument. He was well known to the few people who lived nearby as an eccentric and increasingly paranoid individual. He viewed the public lands surrounding his property as his own private domain and was known to be hostile towards campers and hikers, whom he considered trespassers. He had a minor criminal record, but more importantly, he had a reputation for strange, confrontational behavior. He fit the profile of a hidden monster, a man living on the fringes, capable of sudden and unpredictable violence. Detectives began to quietly build a case against him. They learned he had been seen in the area around the time Charles disappeared. They discovered that Bullard was intimately familiar with the Lone Pine Trailhead, as it was a place he frequented. The pieces were beginning to fit together. They needed more than just suspicion, however. They needed definitive proof that would link Michael Bullard directly to the murder of Charles Moldau. They secured a search warrant for his property. On a cold winter morning, a team of sheriff's deputies and state police investigators executed the warrant, descending on Bullard's isolated and cluttered property. The scene that greeted them was one of disarray and neglect, a reflection of the man who lived there. As they began their methodical search of his home and outbuildings, they looked for anything that might have belonged to the victim: camping gear, clothing, a wallet, or a phone. They knew finding a trophy taken from the crime scene was their best chance to secure a conviction. In a workshop on the property, buried beneath a pile of junk, they found it. It was a small, unassuming digital camera. When detectives turned it on and scrolled through the photos stored on its memory card, their case solidified. The images were a gallery of Charles Moldau's final journey. There were pictures of stunning Oregon landscapes, photos of his campsite, and even a few self-portraits of a smiling, happy man enjoying his vacation. There was no plausible reason for Michael Bullard to be in possession of this camera. It was the irrefutable link they had been searching for. Confronted with the discovery of the camera, Michael Bullard's paranoid and defiant exterior began to crumble. He was taken into custody and brought to the sheriff's office for interrogation. Faced with the evidence, and perhaps the sheer weight of his crime, he confessed. The story he told was not one of a dramatic confrontation or a robbery gone wrong. It was a story of petty grievance and senseless, explosive rage. Bullard told the investigators that he had encountered Charles Moldau near the trailhead. He claimed he was angry because he believed Charles had blocked a road with his car, an act Bullard perceived as a personal slight, a sign of disrespect from an outsider. The two men exchanged words. The argument escalated quickly, fueled by Bullard's paranoia and deep-seated hostility. In a fit of rage, Bullard attacked Charles, striking him in the head with a heavy rock. The single, violent act ended a man's life over nothing. After the murder, Bullard panicked. He loaded Charles's body into the back of his own car and drove it to the Lone Pine Trailhead restroom. In a feat of grim determination, he somehow managed to pry open the heavy concrete vault lid and deposit the body inside, sealing it away. He then drove Charles's Saab miles away to the remote logging road and abandoned it, creating a false trail. He kept the camera as a souvenir, a small trophy from his horrific act. The motive was as banal as it was chilling. A man was dead because of where he parked his car. Michael David Bullard was charged with the murder of Charles Moldau. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The camera, his confession, and the corroborating details of the crime scene painted a clear and undeniable picture of his guilt. He ultimately pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and abuse of a corpse, a plea agreement that spared the Moldau family the trauma of a full trial. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in prison, ensuring that the reclusive and violent man would likely never again be free to harm anyone. The case of Charles Moldau is a story of profound and senseless tragedy. A good man, a father, and a friend set out to find peace in nature and instead found a monster hiding in plain sight. His life was extinguished not for money or revenge, but for a perceived inconvenience, a momentary frustration in the mind of a disturbed and angry individual. The beautiful wilderness he had traveled so far to see became the backdrop for an act of pure, banal evil, and a simple concrete restroom was twisted into a makeshift mausoleum, a final, horrifying resting place that held its dark secret for nearly 3 months.